Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Preimesberger, editor of eWEEK. Thank you very much for joining us today for this latest segment of eWEEK eSpeaks. It's our series of informal conversations that we have with IT thought leaders from all over the world of IT. Our interviewee today is Tom Barton. Tom is the CEO of Diamanti, the Italian name for diamond. Tom, welcome.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit at a high level of what Diamanti does.
Sure. So I've been doing startups in and around the Valley for the last 25, 30 years. I kind of like post-revenue, but pre-scaling. So sort of 5 million to 500 million is what I would say is my sweet spot. A couple companies I'll mention. One was one of the early leaders in open source software called Cygnus Solutions. We had maintenance of GCC and GDB and core tools that were important on the dev side of a lot of embedded systems and also Linux. We ended up getting acquired by Red Hat, and I stayed at Red Hat for a little while. And then the other one I would mention is Rackable Systems. That was an interesting company that we scaled from about 20 million when I joined to over 400 million and took public. That company actually built the physical server infrastructure for a lot of the hyperscalers. So we did YouTube's infrastructure. We actually built Google's first 10,000 servers. We built the original AWS EC2 and S3. So kind of got a chance to see the early emergence of the hyperscalers. And now I came to Diamanti because I became a huge believer in Kubernetes. I became a believer in Kubernetes when I was at a company called Planet that was processing imagery data, and we had many millions of dollars per year spend at AWS, and we built it on Kubernetes. And then we ended up buying Google's satellite assets. And as part of that, we ended up migrating all of our workload processing to GCP. And because we had chosen Kubernetes, it took us about 4 weeks. So I was kind of sold on the power of Kubernetes as an abstraction, and then got vectored in Diamanti. And so here I am. Diamanti is a super innovative company. And I think that, the founders came from Cisco UCS, and they wanted to create, essentially a system. It's really all software is our value add, but it's for running containers-based workloads in Kubernetes at scale, and especially solving the problems of I/O systems, right? So we're not trying to add value over and above the Kubernetes distribution itself. We're really trying to add value around how you process I/O and how you manage very large scale production Kubernetes workloads in an on-prem context, as well as now in a hybrid and multi-cloud context. And a great deal of the innovation was also an early bet that the founders made that NVMe would become important and SSD would become important. And so a lot of the core storage-based technologies assume the existence and are optimized for the existence of NVMe and SSD. So we have just this incredibly differentiated set of data services around persistent storage and also layer 2 and layer 3 networking. And then now we have a set of very nice control plane services around how you manage Kubernetes clusters in a multi-cloud environment, how you manage applications, how you do policy-driven automation to migrate an application or decide where it's going to fail over, if it's going to fail over from a data center to the cloud, et cetera. So that's a bit of a top-level overview. Let me stop there.
That's a great overview. Appreciate that, Tom. Boy, you're talking my language. Storage, open source. I worked before I came to eWEEK in 2005. I was an editor in the Open Source Tech Network, which published Linux.com, SourceForge, NewsForge, Slashdot, and a whole bunch of other. It's now GeekWire. It's all kind of boiled down to GeekWire up in the Pacific Northwest. But
yeah.
I enjoyed working there because I really enjoyed interacting with the open source community. So much talent there, so many good ideas, innovation, and you've seen that too, obviously, in your experience. And of course, Red Hat, Rackable, those are companies that were very successful in the past. You've moved from those now to Kubernetes, which is a must-have thing now in IT and big IT systems, it seems like. Can you explain to me exactly how it works? Is this is it, first of all, it's simply a cloud service, is that right? Or is it something that if a company wanted to put it into a server in a private cloud or data center, could they do it? And is this really a dashboard to control these things, or what?
It's a little bit all of the above. So it's software, and it's run anywhere software that you can run on any server on premises, or you can run it in the cloud. It can help manage not just instance-based servers in the cloud, things like EC2, but also how it manages the storage, both onboard NVMe and an EC2 instance, and also things like EBS. So just think of it as software that runs anywhere. We license on a term software basis. And so, most of our customers have a large on-premises component, and that's really where the company grew up. And now they're all looking to, link into whatever cloud provider they want. You mentioned control plane services. Our Spectra product is our control plane services product. It's in some ways analogous to Rancher, which you've undoubtedly heard of. But it is designed to expose the unique value add of our data plane services and manage persistent storage, manage how you do things like synchronous replication, asynchronous replication, snapshotting, how you do failover of a stateful application, et cetera. So, at the end of the day, it's a little bit like the cloud native version of NSX and vSAN. So think of it as the way you abstract and virtualize storage and networking resources and tie them to containers and pods, and then abstract that for any server, any hardware vendor, any cloud, all in a single control plane.
Right. So independence is the name of the game here. You can play with anybody, it sounds like. Do you consider VMware a direct competitor?
No, I mean, I don't, right? And so increasingly we're trying to partner with them. We actually just closed a deal in the APJ region with actually the Central Bank of Singapore, what they call the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where our data plane services are actually operating in a VMware Tanzu context. And that's because the customer wanted access to container granular capability. They wanted the ability to use our CSI and storage techniques to manage their external arrays also. So, virtual machines certainly have dominated the data center automation landscape for the last decade or more. I think that very quickly people are moving into containers and Kubernetes. Sometimes they're going bare metal, which we absolutely enable. But sometimes they're continuing to either deploy it on top of VMs. So for example, many of our cloud-based technologies actually are deployed on top of a VM. But it's also sometimes the other way around, which is they've got an existing VM-based application and workload, and they want to run that on top of Kubernetes using what's known as a CRD, or custom resource definition. So it's going to be mix and match. And at the end of the day, the customer just wants, performance resulting in lower cost for both their on-premises and their cloud bills. They want the right enterprise security features. They want data protection. They want disaster recovery capabilities. If they can get that using containers, they'll do that. But they obviously don't want to throw away their existing investments in VM-based technologies and tooling.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be almost folly for a company to really try to compete with VMware, which is in like 95% of all the data centers or more in the world. Sure. I remember several years ago, it was 2015 maybe, when Docker was really making a splash at first with its version of Kubernetes, the Kubernetes scheduler. And VMware quickly had to do something because they saw this competitor to them. And it wasn't the same as a virtual machine. It was different. It was diametrically kind of opposed to them. At least that's what they thought at the time. But they've made adjustments. Gelsinger, who's just leaving their CEO job, moving to Intel, who's a good friend and a guy I really respect in this business, saw that early on and really kind of pivoted VMware. VMware plays now with almost everybody, and it has to. In this business, in this world, you've got to be able to be agile. It's all about agile. It's all about being able to connect with other technologies, and that looks like exactly what Diamanti is doing. It's being that connector of dots in a system. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is a fair statement. I mean, Fortune 500 companies at the end of the day are trying to solve a problem, right? And with all of their new investments, I think you mentioned something about agility, but when you think about containers and Kubernetes, it's about the end of monolithic applications and the adoption of microservices, and that is one of the key areas where containers have a leg up on VMs, right? You can introduce using modern CI/CD things like OpenShift, which by the way is a core partner of ours as well. People want to introduce more frequent and incremental change, right, in smaller units. And so containers let you do that, and not sort of introducing things monolithically or a VM at a time or a server instance at a time, but a microservice at a time. So that's what people are trying to do, and everyone is different in a different place with respect to their existing choices and software stacks and where they are on use of on-prem resources or cloud resources. So they've got to have something that's compatible with everybody, right? And you can't have enemies in this space. In some cases, people are frenemies because you're going to compete in some areas and collaborate in others. But at the end of the day, the customer just wants to make the right decisions based on their legacy investments and current state of affairs and where they're trying to get to. And we try to do that. And I'd say the thing that sets us apart is real world enterprise deployments of production systems at scale, right? So, RBC uses us for a mobile banking application that's serving 6.5 million customers with a bare metal, cloud native support for, in their case, I believe it's MongoDB and MariaDB based technologies that are deployed as a service to that application, right? And so, all of these customers want to do it, but there is a skills shortage and a lack of institutional knowledge in the Fortune 500 and Global 1000 around, how do you get the benefits of microservices? How do you deploy Kubernetes in production, et cetera? A lot of the early efforts were on the dev side and CI/CD, and now people are trying to figure out how to put it in production. We've been in production with our customers for more than 2 years, and now they're going to the next level, which is real world hybrid cloud deployments that span their on-premises resources and their cloud providers of choice.
So we have just about a minute to go, Tom. Boy, I could have a long conversation with you about some things. We may have to come back with a follow-up on this, but can we talk about security for just a minute? Do your customers all use their own security schemes and platforms, or do you offer any of that, or what?
Yeah, so we have inherent advantages in our architecture from a security standpoint. We have an optional deployment mechanism, which involves moving IO offload to a separate PCIe card. That's totally optional, but it provides additional security benefits. We do things like separation of control and data plane and having multiple endpoints per pod. So there's a lot of architectural features that promote security. What we don't do is try to do container level threat detection. We partner with others like Aqua and Twistlock and NuVector. So indeed, customers have their own solutions, and we just play well with them. And we always have to pass their security audits before we go live with them.
Sure, absolutely. Containers are tricky with security anyway, right? So thank you. How long has Diamanti been in business?
A little over 6 years.
Okay, so there's a track record there. And very good. So is it Diamanti.com if people want to go deeper for more information?
Absolutely.
Tom Barton, thank you very much for joining us today on eWEEK eSpeaks. It's been delightful.
Thanks, Chris. We appreciate it.
For everybody following along to the end here, have a great rest of your eWEEK. Thanks for joining us on eWEEK eSpeaks. Go to eWEEK.com to hear more conversations with IT thought leaders.